For 10,000 years, humanity whispered a single hope across the void of space, not as a prayer, not as faith, but as a desperate survival instinct passed from one dying world to another, the belief that one day the Emperor of mankind would return, stand up from the throne that bound him, and finally end the long age of decay that had consumed his Imperium from the inside. Entire civilizations rose and fell believing that moment would be salvation, that his return would erase corruption, silence endless wars, and restore purpose to a species that had forgotten why it still fought at all. But history rarely rewards hope in the way it is imagined, and in this timeline, when the Emperor finally awakens, the moment does not arrive with triumph or unity, but with confusion, fear, and a realization so devastating that it reshapes the fate of humanity forever. Because the Emperor does return, not as a myth or a symbol, but as a living mind once more, and what he finds is not an Imperium waiting to be led, but a civilization that has evolved past him, twisted his legacy beyond recognition, and built an entire system of power that no longer has room for the man who created it. This is not the story of a savior rejected by enemies, but of a creator rejected by his own creation, and the slow, irreversible collapse that follows when humanity decides that its future no longer includes the Emperor of mankind. The awakening itself is not dramatic in the way legends would later claim, no blinding light or cosmic tremor announcing his return, but instead a subtle and terrifying shift felt first by those closest to the Golden Throne, as ancient systems that had been stable for millennia suddenly recalibrate themselves, as if responding to a presence they were never meant to sense again. The Emperor's mind, fragmented and burdened by endless suffering, slowly reassembles, and when awareness finally returns, the first thing he feels is not relief, but shock at the scale of what the Imperium has become. Through fragmented data streams, psychic echoes, and the raw sensation of humanity's collective direction, he perceives an empire driven not by rational unity or long-term survival, but by rigid dogma, unquestioned authority, and endless internal purges carried out in his name. The Imperium he built to protect humanity has transformed into something unrecognizable, a machine that sustains itself through fear and repetition rather than understanding and progress. As the Emperor rises from the throne, supported by technologies barely holding together, he realizes that while his body has survived, his vision has not, and the galaxy he once sought to unify now follows an interpretation of him that he never intended and never approved. His first act is not conquest, nor punishment, nor reward, but communication, a direct attempt to reassert clarity into a system drowning in its own traditions, as he sends out a signal across the Imperium declaring that the long stagnation must end, that blind obedience and institutional cruelty have weakened humanity rather than strengthened it, and that the structures built in his absence must be dismantled or reformed if the species is to survive the coming ages. The reaction is immediate and catastrophic, not because his words are unclear, but because they threaten every power structure that has grown comfortable in his silence. High lords hesitate, administrative networks delay transmission, and entire sectors quietly suppress the message before it reaches the public, because the Emperor's return is no longer convenient, it is disruptive, dangerous, and unpredictable. For 10,000 years, humanity learned how to function without his guidance, and in doing so, it built systems that rely on his absence, systems that cannot survive if he truly takes control again. Nowhere is this conflict more visible than among the Space Marines, those engineered to be the Emperor's ultimate instruments, yet now divided by loyalty not to his living will, but to interpretations passed down through unbroken chains of command. Some chapters respond instantly, recognizing the mind they were shaped to follow, abandoning centuries of isolation to rally behind him without hesitation. Others hesitate, bound by traditions older than most star systems, uncertain whether the being who has returned is truly the same Emperor they were created to serve, or something altered by millennia of suffering. A dangerous few openly reject him, declaring that the Imperium cannot afford upheaval, that stability matters more than truth, and that a returning Emperor threatens the fragile balance holding the galaxy together. For the first time since the Horus Heresy, humanity's defenders stand divided not by treachery, but by fear of change. As unrest spreads, civilian worlds react in ways the Emperor never anticipated, not with celebration, but with anxiety, as generations raised under rigid systems struggle to reconcile the living Emperor with a distant, idealized figure used to justify authority. Entire populations have never known a humanity guided by reason and adaptation, only one ruled by tradition and punishment, and to them, the Emperor's return represents uncertainty rather than hope. Riots erupt on hive worlds where officials attempt to suppress information, while elsewhere, planetary governors openly declare neutrality, unwilling to risk their power by choosing sides. Humanity does not rise as one, it fractures along ideological lines, and in that fracture, the Emperor understands the truth he can no longer ignore, that humanity has outgrown him, not by becoming stronger, but by becoming dependent on systems that thrive without his presence. The response from the Imperium's ruling institutions is calculated and ruthless, not through open rebellion, but through quiet resistance, delayed orders, redirected fleets, and carefully constructed narratives framing the Emperor as a destabilizing force whose sudden return endangers trillions of lives. The Inquisition fractures internally, some factions seeking direct contact, others declaring containment protocols, while entire battle groups are reassigned under the justification of maintaining order. The Emperor watches as his own empire mobilizes against him without ever declaring war, using bureaucracy, logistics, and fear as weapons far more effective than armies. It is not hatred that drives them, but self-preservation, and in that realization, the Emperor finally understands that reclaiming humanity may require destroying the Imperium entirely. Faced with this reality, the Emperor stands at a crossroads more devastating than any battlefield decision he has ever made, because every option leads to loss. To enforce his will would mean civil war on a scale that could erase humanity completely, while withdrawal would ensure the Imperium continues its slow decay, vulnerable to threats it no longer understands. For the first time, the Emperor confronts the possibility that his greatest failure was not the Horus heresy, nor the long millennia bound to the throne, but the belief that humanity could be guided indefinitely by a single vision. He sees now that the Imperium does not fear his power, but his ability to change the rules it has relied upon for survival. The breaking point comes when a sector-wide command is issued without his approval, authorizing mass purges in the name of stability, and the Emperor intervenes directly, overriding command networks and halting the operation. The response is immediate, as several High Lords formally declare his actions incompatible with the Imperium's continuity, framing him not as a leader, but as an unpredictable anomaly. At that moment, the line is crossed, and humanity, through its representatives, makes a decision that will echo through eternity, choosing control over clarity, structure over truth, and survival as they understand it over the vision that once united them. The Emperor is not imprisoned, nor attacked outright, but isolated, cut off from the mechanisms that once amplified his will, surrounded by loyalists who are now labeled extremists and destabilizers. Across the galaxy, official records are rewritten, framing his return as a temporary aberration, a malfunction of ancient systems rather than a true awakening. Humanity moves forward, not in rebellion, but in denial, choosing a version of reality that allows existing power structures to endure. The Emperor watches as his influence fades once more, not because he is weak, but because humanity no longer wants what he represents to die in the end. The Emperor does not rage, nor does he seek revenge, because understanding comes with a clarity more painful than anger. Humanity did not reject him out of malice, but out of fear of change, fear of losing the systems that gave them certainty in an unforgiving universe. As he withdraws into silence once more, not bound by machinery, but by choice, the Imperium continues onward, unchanged, unaware that in rejecting the Emperor of mankind, it has rejected the last chance to evolve beyond endless war. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, the future waits, not with judgment, but with consequences that no throne, no empire, and no legend can prevent.